Hello, BookTube. Recently, I've had home construction going on here at Hyde Cottage, so I have been dropping the ball on my slim dance card of BookTube obligations. There are a few things that I've been doing, read-alongs that I'm either doing or promised to do, events that I do, one thing or another. And because when the construction grew out of control, it supernovaed, uh, out of I wasn't expecting it to happen, and so I wasn't prepared for it. And I've let the ball drop on a lot of those things. And one of those things was would have happened today. It was Wednesday Comics, our world's finest collaboration that I do with Michael K. Vaughan about comic books. I owe him one of those. The last one he did all by himself was about Solomon Kane. But today, I wasn't sure what the schedule would be like here for work. I wasn't sure if I'd be able to make videos. It looks to me like maybe Michael and I will take a break from World's Finest Comics until August. Which I don't want to think about because World's Finest Comic Book Wednesdays are under Michael's control. He's the one who picks what we read for that day. And August, we're both hosts for the worst BookTube event of them all, Garb August. And there have been a lot of garbage comic book runs, and Michael has them all in $100 omnibus editions. So I'm not looking forward to that. But he didn't make a comic book video today. Instead, he did a discussion video. And I was just content to watch it and feel miserable because I let the ball drop on our comic book stuff until I saw what the discussion video was and watched it. He did a discussion video called Is It Possible to Have Too Many Books? Can you have too many books? Talk about a discussion video that got right to the heart of all of us here on BookTube. And he goes over whether or not it's possible to do. He talks about gives an anecdote about someone that he knew once who had books everywhere, books piled in front of books, in front of books, in front of books, and all of those piles piled in front of bookcases. A hoarder, in other words. And I have seen collections like that took over a space. I've also seen one magnificent example in Truro, which is on Cape Cod here in Massachusetts, where someone had a wonderful old sandalwood beach house, and the house had a dilapidated old barn in the back on his property. Still relatively sound, but you couldn't do anything with it. It was just an eyesore on the landscape. And he decided, I'm going to spend money on that barn. I could spend it on all sorts of things. I could buy a new car. I could buy a mistress. I could buy more property. Instead, I'm going to spend money on that barn. And he did. I was there the whole step. I was there every step of the way. We conferred about all of it. He put in, he had it all sounded out by an architect, and he put in beautiful, big, irregular flagstone paving for the flooring of the thing. Just amazing. I mean, he had it all. He had the ground sort of graded and undergraded, and I think there was a mesh net of some kind or something like that. But the flooring, he put in big, irregular gray flagstones. Had the whole of the building sounded and knocked all over and reinforced everywhere. It did a lot of roofing. The roofing is where the money is. Oh my, that's where it started to cost money. And he did it with one goal in mind, and that was to make it a library. Because his own space in his house was being overrun by books. And he did, and over the course of a wonderful day, we moved books out into that barn. And it was wonderful. Suddenly, you could move around in his house. Suddenly you could see the grace and beauty of the lines and air and flow and light of his house. And the books had a place of their own. But that's not usually the case. Usually people don't have access to an unused barn that they can sink $30,000 into to fix up. Usually that isn't the case. Instead, they pile books in their places, in their houses and their apartments. And that quickly gets out of control. Most people don't pay attention to the vital second element of loving to collect books, and that is loving to get rid of them. You have to get rid of them as well. They have to be going out. Imagine if you ate without ever pooping. You'd have a problem, and you'd have a problem pretty quick. And Michael K. Vaughan in his video asks, where is the dividing line for that problem? Where is that problem? And in his video, he gives some examples drawn from BookTube. He mentions, for instance, Criminale, and he points out something that I've noticed myself, which is that when Criminale first hoisted himself onto us all on BookTube, his books were under control in the background of his videos, and they're not anymore. There are piles of books everywhere now. in his videos. And Michael K. Vaughan also showed an infamous example. Shawn D. Standfast, who makes tons and tons of videos now, much to my delight. His videos are wonderful. But when you look at his videos, he is surrounded on all sides up to the skies with teetering piles of books. It's easy to imagine them falling and crushing him, entombing him forever, so that he only wakes up centuries later like Black Adam. And he doesn't know what that reference is because he doesn't know talkies. But anyway, Michael K. Vaughan wonders in his video, when is too much? Especially if, in his case, as in mine, as in the case of a lot of you, you love e-reading. You love your Kindle. Or you love reading on your iPad. If that's true, you have even less excuse. And of course, since he was called out, Shawn Standfast made a response video of his own, under a minute, in which he loudly proclaimed that you can never have too many books. Never. The whole goal is to amass an unbelievable amount of books and then have them kill you. I couldn't help but throw my hat in the ring, especially since I feel like I owe a collaborative video to Michael on Wednesdays. So I thought that I would break things down into the rules of three. Right? All good Catholics like things that break down into threes. Let's break this down into threes, because believe it or not, despite the fact that we're leaving these questions up in the air because it's so much fun to do so, it's easy to tell whether or not you have too many books. You can use three rules. They don't all have to be met. But if all three of them are met, and that's true in a lot of your cases, then you do have too many books. The first of those three things is, do you have the physical room for the books that you have? Can you easily navigate your house? Are there piles of books on the floor? Telltale sign. Are there piles of books in places where books shouldn't be? Food cupboards, utility closets, that sort of thing. That you have to move around, that you have to squeeze past. Can you navigate? Do you have more books than your physical space will allow? Keeping in mind here that allowing means books on shelves. If you have books on the floor, the answer to that question is already no. So yardstick number one for whether or not you have too many books is, are they inconveniently spilling into the space that you have, where you live, where you do everything else that isn't just collecting and reading books? That's thing number one. Thing number two, indicator number two is, can you access your books? All of them, easily. Can you do that? I'm not talking here about double stacked books. All of these things are double stacked. It is, if you double stack mass market paperbacks, it's the easiest thing in the world to get at the ones that are back there. And routinely you want to pull these things. I routinely pull out my double and triple stack books, make stacks on the floor, reorganize them, and put them back up in a different order so that I'm looking at different things. But even if I didn't do that, it would be easy for me to get at the stuff that's double stacked, right? It's easy to do. So I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about inaccessible books, where books have made other books inaccessible, where you have piles of books in front of a closed cabinet, for instance, or a closed bookshelf. So that not only would you have to spend all morning moving those piles of books, but that you can't even see what's behind them because you'd have to move them in order to open the door. If you have books that are inaccessible, you have too many books. The whole point of having books is to use them, is to pull them down and read them, check on them, refer to them, consult them, not just to have them. That is absolute insanity. It's absolute insanity to just have something without any intention of ever using it, without any ability to use it. So that's thing number two. Thing number one is, do you have enough space for the books you own? If the answer is no, then the answer is no, and you have too many books. Thing number two is, can you access the books that you have, or are books preventing you from doing that? If the answer to that question is yes, and for instance, in Michael K. Vaughan's video, he mentions that there are books that are hard to access at Vaughan Manor and at Stately Vaughan Lodge. And Shawn Standfast watches videos. How many times? At least once a week in a video of his, he will say, I do have that book, but I can't get at it. If you can't get at it, then you don't have it. If you can't get at it, then you have too many books. Those are the first two indicators, and the third indicator is the killer. It's the worst of them all. And you're all guilty. You're all absolutely guilty. We'll still stick with threes. It's the third indicator, but it also has the number 3. And that is 3 years. 3 years. BookTube. Not 10 years. Not 15 years. 3 years. Do you have any books in your collection that you have not touched or even thought about in 3 years? If you do, then you have too many books. Your books aren't there to take up space. They're there to be used. How much have I noticed that in this last month or 2 months or 10 years or however long this home construction has gone on? How much have I noticed that? How often I use these books? How much I miss my bookcases of collected reviews and essays about books. That bookcase is entirely topped over, and there hasn't been a day I haven't wanted to go to it and check on something. There have been in the past, even here at Hyde Cottage, times when I had vast swaths of books, whole walls of them, that I didn't check at all. I never looked at them. I barely thought about them. All I ever did was box them up and move them when it was time. That's all. I don't have those books anymore. I have fewer physical books now than I ever have had when I wasn't traveling, and I plan on getting that number down even more. But what about you? You have lots of books that you have not. I'm not talking about, I'm not in the mood for it or whatever. I'm talking about that it's not on your radar at all. You've never thought about it in 3 years or more. Some of you, I'm sure it's a lot more. I'd be willing to bet there are some of you who have books you literally haven't touched in 10 years. If that's the case, then you have too many books. It is easy to determine whether or not you have too many books. All 3 of those indicators will tell you. And if you have all 3, where you don't have enough room, and you don't have access to your books, and there are plenty of books that you haven't looked at, touched, or thought about in 3 years or more, then you have too many books. What you need to do is develop a system to get rid of them. There needs to be a back door as well as a front door. That's harder for some people than for others, but it's not impossible. Even if you don't have anywhere near you, there are plenty of places dotted all throughout America that have those big collection bins at the side of parking lots. Dump your books here. And the local, charity shops and resale shops and whatnot, wait for those bins to fill up and use them. Dust off that stock, see which of it they can resell for what kind of profit. You probably have some of those nearby, but even if you have nothing at all, you certainly have Amazon. It's the work of a minute. I shouldn't say a minute. It's the work of half an hour to set up an Amazon account. Not just to download books, ebooks. I'm not going to scold you about ebooks because they don't take up any space. But it takes half an hour at most to set up an account so that you're selling books on Amazon. It doesn't have to be your side gig, your side hustle. It doesn't have to make you any money, but it does get rid of books. Set up that account, and then you go on a different part of Amazon and order some shipping supplies. Some padded envelopes, that sort of thing. Chances are you make regular visits to the post office. Just start selling books on Amazon to get rid of your stock. You don't have to make a killing. You don't have to make any money at all. Be a penny seller. Say, this is a penny. I just want to get rid of it. That's all. Be one of those sellers. Be conscientious to your customers. You'll get a great rating. Might be the start of something, but it doesn't need to be. The key thing is that it will get rid of books that you don't want. That's the cruel thing here, and it's crucial for you to realize. If you have books that you can't get to, if you have books that you don't remember, that you haven't touched or looked at or thought about in years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, then you don't want that book. You simply don't. It's time that we all recognize that. Right? I know that mood cycles can be long-term things. You can go 2 years without being in the mood for something, and you'll be happy when you have it on the shelf. But you have an e-reader for those kind of whims. And there's nothing you can't get on your e-reader in 2 seconds. They do not need to be taking up space in your house. Those are for the books that you love, that you use, that you think about, that you go to. Like the ones here in this little room. So that's my 2 cents on the subject, but it's not just my 2 cents, it's the whole of the bank account. Because keep in mind, Steve is always right. I have been dealing with this subject a long time. And I know that you will be happier, you will feel better if you declutter your books. lot of people who are in love with the whole fad of decluttering draw a line on books. They won't do it. But it's usually the books that are the worst offender. Just go by those guidelines and you won't go wrong. Can you access all of your books? Can you walk right over to that wall and pull the Oxford Book of English Ghost Stories right off the shelf? Can you do that when you want to read it? If you can't do that, if you've reached the point, as some diehard book hoarders I know have reached, where you know that you have a copy of the book, but you can't get to it, so you're just going to buy another copy, then you have a problem and you need to address it. If you can't access your books, then you have too many books. If you can't access the rest of your house because of books, then you have too many books. And if you don't think about them, if you don't use them, if you don't put them to the use that books yearn to be put to, then you have too many books. Cut down your number of books. There is no conceivable reason why an individual person should have more than 1,000 printed books. Now, plenty of you do. I do. I have more than 1,000. And I know people who have 10 times as many as I do. But that's, I guess, marginally permissible if the books are on shelves and you take care of them. But if they're just piled in heaps, no. Use my 3-pronged, 3-tier attack. Can you reach your books? Can you reach everything else that your books aren't blocking anymore? And do you use your books? Use those yardsticks and you'll know right away if you have too many books. I'm suspecting that a lot of you do. Time to start investigating how to get rid of books. That's my advice to you. It's easy for me to say, since if I ever get the Usified Cottage back, getting rid of, I want to drop another 1,000 books, and getting rid of those will be one of my first projects if I ever get the use of my floors back. But I had to weigh in on the subject because I've dealt with this a lot. But anyway, I'm going to wrap this up, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.